This is a debate we should have been having some time ago, not just a year ago, probably more like 3 years ago. And I did hear the member for North Sydney talk about how timely the legislation was, coming in the same week the Morrison government released its pamphlet on net zero emissions by 2050. But actually, it is years overdue, as was that so-called commitment to net zero. But when you have a government that pretends that the need for climate action isn't urgent and pretends that the existing policy settings are enough, what you end up with is lost opportunities. And we had a lost opportunity with this. It's taken so long for this to come to the parliament. Look, we also had a lost opportunity when the COVID economic response ignored any investment in renewables. By contrast to Australia, the Italian government unveiled its national COVID recovery plan, which allocated a total of €196 billion to six key areas. And one of those areas was renewables, and the plan included €74.3 billion earmarked for a green revolution and ecologic transition. Now, I'm not even going to try and translate those euros to Australian dollars, but it's a whole lot more. And proportionately, it's more than we have looked at investing, and that's shameful, a terrible lost opportunity. That's what we're talking about here with this legislation. Instead of being the renewable energy superpower that we have the potential to be by now, we are way behind. The UK already has the world's largest offshore wind generation capacity, and in October 2020 the UK government announced a target of 40 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2030, up from its original 30 gigawatts by 2030 target. It's good at increasing its targets, particularly its 2030 target. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said to the Conservative Party conference this time last year, "In 10 years' time, offshore wind will be powering every home in the country." Now, this isn't some socialist government in Scandinavia. This is a Conservative British Prime Minister. And he's obviously talking about a country that is not blessed with endless sunshine. And they have seen the opportunity that wind gives. Well, we are really lucky. We not only have sunshine, we have wind. The global development of offshore wind resources has sped up as part of that broader shift to lower emissions energy. Yet we haven't. The EU is targeting 60 gigawatts, the US 30 gigawatts, South Korea 12 and Japan 10. All of this is expected to drive the addition of 200 gigawatts of offshore generation. Now, I'd like you to keep that 200 gigawatts in mind. Let's turn to Australia. In Australia, we have one of the longest coastlines in the world, thanks to being a pretty big island, which gives us so much potential for offshore wind. We have some of the best wind resources in the world, especially along our southern coast. Conditions across a lot of that coast rival the North Sea, an area which we all know has dozens of wind farms already servicing places like Denmark and Germany. We have more offshore wind resource than we could ever possibly use ourselves. Recent research by the Blue Economy CRC indicates that feasible wind resources in Australia could be around 2,233 gigawatts capacity. 2,233 gigawatts, and that compares to what I mentioned earlier, the 200 gigawatts that the combined global capacity is targeting. So there's a massive opportunity for us. Our energy market is around 55 gigawatts. So we've got a whole lot more than Australia needs, and that's why there's so much potential for exporting to Southeast Asia. Yet, in spite of that, not a single offshore project has been developed in Australian waters. But fortunately, not everybody has had their head in the sand, as the Morrison government has, on offshore wind and previous Liberal leaders. There are 10 projects that are currently being blocked by the government because we haven't had this legislation to allow the construction of offshore wind farms. The combined projects have a capacity generation of more than 25 gigawatts. That's, for the first 10 projects, that's a significant amount. One of the key ones is the Star of the South off Gippsland, which, when complete, will produce enough energy to cover 20% of Victoria's current energy needs. And it's partly because these turbines are so much bigger than the ones I drive past on my way from Macquarie, the electorate of Macquarie, to Canberra along Lake George. One single turn of an offshore wind turbine can provide as much energy as a whole day's worth of rooftop solar, just because of the size and capacity of it. The turbines can turn 15 times each minute. And when you add in floating turbine foundations, which can operate in very deep waters, you open access to a lot more windy offshore locations. For us, some of the best resources are located just off the coast of regions that have traditionally been the powerhouses of Australia. Gippsland and Latrobe, Newcastle and the Hunter, Illawarra, Gladstone and Central Queensland. Now, the positives are that these regions already have strong electricity grid infrastructure. They've got the ports, they've got the railways, and they've got the populations for new energy and new industry. Most of the proposals, these 10 proposals, are situated near traditional energy regions because of those strong connections to the electricity grid. And of course, under Labor, we want to see that grid expanded. That rewiring of the grid is so that things that need to be developed away from those traditional areas can be. But these ones are a great place to start. It's not just that the energy created will benefit Australia. These communities and their workers will have the most to gain from a new, thriving offshore wind industry. They're going to get the jobs. The turbines need maintenance, and there's a network of ships and ports required for that maintenance. 26,000 people already work in the offshore wind industry in the United Kingdom, and 70,000 are expected to by 2026. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? OceanX is looking at spending $31 billion to build 7.5 gigawatts worth of offshore wind and significantly upgrade ports. So there's investment there that will generate jobs. Green Energy Partners have 2 projects they're looking to start exploratory work on, off the Illawarra and off Newcastle. And they want to use Port Kembla as a construction hub. So this diversification in these areas is going to allow so many new high-skilled jobs. Paddy Crumlin, who's the National Secretary of the Maritime Union, sees this opportunity to create a huge number of high-skilled jobs in Australia. He notes that we already have highly skilled seafarers and offshore oil and gas workers who are capable of constructing offshore wind projects, and that these projects can provide the opportunity for those workers to transition into the important work of delivering Australia's clean energy future. Now, Labor has always known that there were jobs in renewables. The Morrison government has denied it, and they've created fear around it. They've created the fear because that is what they do best. We know that there will be jobs, and in fact, one of the things that will be needed in these jobs are the young workers coming through as well. And Labor's focused very much on the apprentices that we will need into this renewables sector. And I want to take a moment to outline the plan that we have, because it isn't just a plan that says it's a plan, it actually has key steps that allow something to be implemented. So there might be a good lesson in this for the government. What we know already around new energy jobs is that 3 in 4 solar companies are already saying they're having difficulty recruiting electricians, for instance, because there are not enough candidates with specific experience. And in spite of that, they're still booming, but they need more support to do even better. So what Labor would like to see is a dedicated commitment, and under a Labor government, that's what we'll have. We'll invest $10 million in a new energy skills program. There'll be 10,000 new energy apprenticeships available over 4 years, and we're very specific how many that will be each year, 2,500 commencements a year from 2022-23. So it's not just a hope, It's not a horizon, it's not an ambition, it's a target and a plan to achieve it. We know that there have been cuts to TAFE that have severely reduced the availability of training pathways for these new skills, and particularly those that are not yet in the market at scale. And we know that that's another area that needs to be addressed, so that there are the training capacities, and that's where the extra $10 million in a new energy skills program comes. So they're tangible things that we want to do, and we have laid out those steps for how we achieve that, and that's what will be needed, Deputy Speaker, to be able to really make the most of the opportunities we have for offshore wind. These bills are useful. They provide a regulatory framework for electricity infrastructure. They allow the construction, the installation, the commissioning, the operation, the maintenance and the decommissioning of offshore wind and other electricity infrastructure. But we do need to move fast on this. It is a race. We do need to go from it being a piece of legislation to being enacted. In their submission to the Senate, the department responsible for this area noted that there is no provision in the legislation that mandates or sets a time frame for declaring an area. Now, several submissions have from the business community have made note that this whole thing is long overdue and stress the importance of moving quickly to declare zones and award licences so that they can get on with the job. This government, the Morrison government, has been stopping business from being able to get on with the job in building offshore wind farms. It's time that that changed. Now, in the time I have left, Deputy Speaker, I just want to touch on a couple of things that we would like to see added to these bills. We will support these bills. They are necessary. They are overdue. They will open up the potential for renewable industries. But there are a couple of things we'd like to see, and one is to amend one of the clauses to better incorporate electricity transmission and exports. The opportunity, the capacity that we have here means this isn't just a renewable energy for us, for Australians. This is for export as well. Australia can be the battery of Southeast Asia, especially after we harness this opportunity of offshore wind, and we need to make sure that this legislation allows that. The other thing, one of the other concerns we have, Deputy Speaker, is that the work health and safety concerns that we have are not expressed in this bill. The committee that did the inquiry heard substantial evidence that the government has not adopted the harmonised national work health and safety law into the bills. And without harmonisation, what that means is we might end up with a situation where a worker would be subject to one regulatory regime on shore and a second one while they're travelling out on a vessel, and then a third one while they're working on the offshore renewable project. Now, that's a terrible confusion for workers. It's terrible for employers to have to operate in that environment. Labor's national platform is very clear that we will improve and harmonise the WHS regulatory frameworks covering workers in offshore clean energy. Australia's had some years to get this right. During the whole feasibility period, we can do this going forward and get it right so that employers and workers are not paying the price for it, and it's crucial that we do. Deputy Speaker, we need to also make sure that the benefits of these offshore wind farms flow through to the onshore communities that are linked to them. The local businesses, the entire community should see benefit out of it. This should be something that is positive, not just something that's sucking away from a local community. But that doesn't seem to be an issue that's been addressed by the government, and it should be. Deputy Speaker, we know the views of those opposite, that they think wind farms on land are ugly, that solar doesn't work in the dark, and that batteries are only as useful as the big banana. But people out in the real world actually know what the opportunity is to have renewable energy. They want renewable energy. That is why people have put solar on their roofs. And what we should be doing in this place is everything possible to make it easy for people to access renewable energy. These bills, we welcome them. They are well overdue. We certainly won't hold them up, but they could do with amendments, and I would urge the government to support the changes that we have put forward.